Okay, we are using the Timekeeper's Forfeit in this video. It's a pretty interesting amulet. I do like it. I think I do really like it. I don't necessarily love it because there's some like weird interactions going on with it, and some of the things that I would like to work better don't work quite as well. But I mean, it's okay. It's not bad. I think it could use maybe a little bit more something maybe. But it's interesting, and there is quite a few weird things about it. So we're going to start with those things, and I'm going to like kind of go over some of the stuff that I've noticed. And if you're not interested in that and you just want to see the straight build and gameplay that I'm using for this specific setup right here, you can skip ahead to that chapter because I'll actually try and put chapters in this time. Actually, there will be no chapters in this video. There will be no loadout in this video. It's no build at all. Apparently, I'm going to rant and ramble about this amulet for about 20 minutes. So if you're not here for that and you're not interested, now's the time to get out. Okay, what does it do? Well, it's going to increase our status effect damage by 50%, and then applying a status effect to an enemy also applies it to the wearer. So we're going to go for a status effect build, which are always just kind of solid. And then anytime we apply those statuses, it's going to hit us, which is a really interesting part. That's the thing that I really like, because it allows, it adds more accessibility for a few different rings, specifically the Alchemy Stone, the Embrace of Shahala, and the Tempest Conduit. Like, those are the three main ones. Now, I'm using it with the Reaping Stone right here because you remove an elemental status effect to get immunity and increased lifesteal. But those are like the three right here that I think it really enables, because normally you have to do some crazy shenanigans to make those work. Now, some things to know about this amulet. I had to take notes because I kept losing track of myself and like what I was doing. It has like set values. So the damage that it's going to apply to you is a set number. So it doesn't matter how much damage you increase your status effects by, like how much you crank them up, how long you make the duration or anything like that. So I can be doing, 35, 35, 35 right there. But the thing is, it's always going to it's going to have a set duration. It's going to have a set value. So its fire baseline lasts for about 6 seconds. I'm immune to status effects right now, so I don't have to worry about it. But if we hit it again, you can see we had actually a little over 3 seconds. Standard, it's supposed to be about 6 seconds, but we've got some crap going on that's like kind of jacking with it, right? So that's normally 6 seconds. Bleeding will always, like, it doesn't matter if your bleed lasts for 10 seconds, 20, 30, 90, whatever. When you apply the bleed to yourself, it's going to last about 30 seconds. When you apply the corrosion, it's going to last for 10 seconds. Overloaded is weird. Overloaded is super weird, but that one's like a 10-second thing, but it procs like 2 times. So they have a set duration, regardless of whatever modifiers you have going on to the status effects that you're applying to enemies, and regardless of the damage numbers the damage that you're modifying to the enemies, the value is the same as it comes to you. It has its own internal value things. Again, overloaded is weird though. So fire, we could be doing, 2 stacks of 35 a second, but baseline, the fire that we apply to ourselves is going to last for 6 seconds and end up doing about like 24 damage or something like that. 26 damage maybe. So that's what it's going to be at. Now, this value is affected by resistances. So like when we have higher values of resistances here, it's going to reduce those damage numbers. When we have on the ritual list, the Dark Blood perk, reducing damage received by status effects by 25%, that also affects it. So those things do reduce your damage that you take from it, which is pretty cool. I like that. But if we have the affliction trait on here, increasing the duration, does not affect the duration that is applied to us. When we put on the Timekeeper's Jewel, which adds another 100% like duration value to our statuses, also does not apply to us. So it's still going to last, it's 6, 10, 30 seconds, whatever it is. Now, those times can go and be increased. So if we like constantly applied burning here, it will actually stack up to 10 seconds. That corrosion will stack up to 30 seconds. Bleed will go up to like 1.5 minutes. And I think overloaded was like 15 seconds or 16 seconds, something weird, right? So you can increase the duration that's on you by constantly reapplying those status effects, but it's not going to affect the damage values. Now let's talk a little bit about overloaded. Overloaded is super weird because when you use it in here, it has its set number value when you use it in the like training ground, right? The dummy field shooting range. And from what I've seen, you know, it is baseline is doing like 14-ish damage, something like that, with like no resistances or anything like that, or the vial perk on, right? It's doing about 14 damage. And so what should happen is when we go against regular enemies, it should do 14 damage to us, right? Right now it's going to do way less because we also have the dark blood perk on and stuff and resistances. So it does very little damage. But if we go out into the real world, you can see how much it actually does. All right, we hit him with the axe. You remember how much damage it did before? Look how much it's doing now. That's so much more. When I don't have any resistances, when I don't have any increase to my health, the lightning will one-shot me. It one-shots me. And the lightning seems to be affected by the damage reduction. And that could, which is interesting as well. So like when I had the Embrace of Shahala on, increasing my damage resistance for having a status effect on me, the lightning was actually doing less damage, which is, I don't necessarily think it's how it's supposed to work because it's got resistances for that. Unless it's supposed to calculate both values, and I'm just unaware of that, right? So in the actual gameplay, the Overloaded does a lot more damage. It was doing close to 300 damage. You know, it's baseline here because baseline, this shock effect is doing about 300 damage. So it seems to be doing about 300 damage to us because what I ended up doing then, I increased my HP to 154, and then I put a medic shield on, so we had a shield for 100% of our HP, giving us an effective health of about 308, and then when I did the Overloaded, it didn't kill me, but it left me with a tiny little piece of health, probably about 8, so it's doing like 300 damage baseline. But now here's what's also weird. This is on Apocalypse. Like, I'm testing it on Apocalypse. When I went to survival difficulty, because that's where I'd messed around on some campaign stuff, it was only doing about 50 damage. Why is the damage value changing with your, you know, with the difficulty? So there's some weird chicanery going on with the old Overloaded. Now something else about the amulet, and this isn't necessarily a direct problem with it. It's just kind of a problem that I have with it, right? So because the value, like, because you apply a bunch of things to yourself, like you probably want to use the Alchemy Stone or the Embrace of Shahala, right? Something like that. The Tempest Conduit we'll get into in a second, right? This just needs one status effect on you, but the thing you need to keep in mind when using the Alchemy Stone is it increases the base lifesteal value by 6%. So if you don't have any lifesteal baseline, Alchemy Stone is not going to do anything for you. I made that mistake. I didn't realize that. So if you don't have any lifesteal, Alchemy Stone is not going to help you out, but it will enhance it if you have some. The Embrace of Shahala can have up to 2 stacks. So if you have 2 status effects on you, you can get an extra 15% damage reduction, right? Now, the thing that I struggle with this amulet is part of me is like, okay, I'm going to be applying a status effect to myself. Let me focus in really hard on one, because if I'm doing damage to myself, I want to increase that, like, damage resistance a bunch, right? So that I take very little damage from it, and then I can like super enhance it. So for example, you know, I lean in with like fire, and then I put on the Firestone to increase my fire damage and my fire resistance. We put on the Tempest Conduit, so then when I take that damage, it's also increasing the resistance as well and increasing all my damage. We'll talk about the all damage in a second. So like I do that so I can like really crank up my damage resistance to the single status effect that I'm using. But the thing is, this is increasing it by 50%. And if I'm only focusing on one specific damage type like fire, why would I choose the Timekeeper's Forfeit over the Talisman of the Sun, which is going to increase my burning damage by 50% and my fire damage by 25%? So if you're going to focus on one specific like status effect elemental damage type, you're probably better off using something like the Talisman of the Sun or the Shock Device, whatever, you know, corresponding elemental amulet that you have. So then you want to have, if you really want it to be better than those two, you need to make sure you're doing like 2 status effects. I mean, also you do need to consider this does enable the things like, you know, the Embrace of Shahala and stuff. So that is something to keep in mind. You can do options like that. But in theory, I want to use like 2 status effects. Maybe 3. I can't use overloaded. Overloaded is going to mess me up. That completely ruins miasma for me because miasma applies overloaded. So then I've got problems. So I probably want to use like 2 status effects, which is what I'm doing here with like fire and corrosion. But then I start asking myself, I'm like, well, you know, it's increasing that status effect damage by 50%, which is good. It can be quite a lot. Smolder does a lot of damage, so it's a pretty big damage increase there, right? But then I'm like, I have these other options because I do. So I'm like, why would I choose Timekeeper's Forfeit over the Energized Net Coil? Because it's not doing 50% more damage, but it's also doing the burst. I mean, Energized Net Coil is just really good to use. Like, how is it beating out the Energized Net Coil? And the only thing I could say is like, well, the Timekeeper's Forfeit allows you to use those other rings. But are those other rings really beating out the other amulet? And the other thing to consider is if the only reason I'm using Timekeeper's Forfeit is so I can use the Alchemy Stone and the Embrace of Shahala, what other rings am I missing out on? Because like I might have these 2 on, but that means I'm not using, you know, I've got 2 ring slots taken up by those, which means I could have been using, you know, Shadow of Misery or maybe the Black Spindle or something like that, right? Like, so I'm having a hard time, like, kind of like comparing it and seeing if it's really worth it or not. That's like me trying to like ideally like min-max it, which is the true best. At the end of the day, it works just fine. Like, it's okay. There's not necessarily issues with it. I think the Energized Net Coil is probably better, right? If you're going with a single one, your various elemental amulets are probably going to be better. And if you're doing like all of the status effects, then Fragrant Thorn is probably better though, because you're also getting the exposed effect on there, increasing everything's damage by 15% and helping out your team. So like, it's kind of in this weird zone where I'm not sure how I completely feel about it. Let's talk about Tempest Conduit real quick. This is kind of just a minor sidebar, I guess. After receiving elemental damage, increase all your elemental damage dealt, or increases all your damage dealt by 15%, and then resistance to that element is increased, right? So in theory, I do the fire damage, I hit it with fire, now I'm doing more damage, and I'm resisting the fire more, which is perfect because that Timekeeper's Forfeit automatically just puts it on me. The problem is, we're building for status effect damage, is the idea, because that's what Timekeeper's Forfeit does. But for whatever reason, Tempest Conduit doesn't actually increase those status effect damages, right? So when we go out here and we hit this guy with our, let's take out these extra things. When we hit him with our Spark Fire, it's doing 35 2 ticks because we had the Red Ring of Death. So now when I put on the Tempest Conduit, in theory, what we should see is an increase in damage. And actually, we can test it a little bit better with the Burden of the Destroyer. 15% increase to all our damage dealt. So it was 35. Now it's going to be 38, right? There's that 15% damage increase. So now we put on the Tempest Conduit, and when we shoot it and it applies fire to us, it should increase that damage. It doesn't, but it will increase all the other damage types. It does also increase our resistances, but the problem is we're trying to build for status effect damage, and if the Tempest Conduit is not increasing our status effect damage, it's not as good as it could be. Now, if we're using mods a lot for how we're applying statuses, so if we're using like Witchfire, the Firestorm, Voltaic Rondour, it'll increase those mod damage numbers, but it's not going to do the status effect thing. So it's something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, the Tempest Conduit is not quite as good as it should be right now. Another thing to keep in mind, Hardcore Metal Band. You're taking damage because you're applying statuses to yourself, which means you're building up stacks of Bulwark because you have dealt damage to yourself. Anything else that I needed to mention here? I think I'm forgetting something. I wrote down notes and I'm still forgetting something, I think. I guess, as far as like really building around it, I think there's 2 ways to do it. One way is to have effects that stay on you so that you can really get the effects of Alchemy Stone and the Embrace of Shahala. So you want to apply the status effects and keep them on you. Bleed is going to work really well for this because it lasts for so long. Baseline is going to last for 30 seconds on you. And then with, by using like the Merciless, because it's going to start rapid fire applying it, you're quickly going to get up to 90 seconds and you're going to have your constant damage bonuses and lifesteal bonuses. So right now with 3 stacks of Bulwark, we're sitting at a 57.6 damage bonus. I don't know why it dropped off. Yeah, 57.6. But then if we trade that out and we put on, say, the Embrace of Shahala, we got to let these stacks of bulwark go away. Yeah, see, it's only a 52.1%. Oh, well, we've only got one status effect. We need to put a second one on. So 2 stacks of the Embrace of Shahala, 56%. So you could stack up both of them, right? And then get yourself a nice meaty 62% damage reduction at a medium roll without any points in strong back. This is also with maxed out Fortify as well, so 65% right now. So you could do some nice damage reduction setups with that by keeping status effects on you, right? And then because you're keeping them on you, throw on the Alchemy Stone. So now we've got a good increase to our lifesteal amount. So baseline we should be doing, it says 9% right now. If we take this off, it shows a 3% on our tooltip. So you could put in that Alchemy Stone so that you're getting a good amount of lifesteal. And the good thing about that too is that lifesteal is going to counteract the statuses that you're putting on yourself. So by having a good amount of lifesteal, even though we're technically should be losing life for having status effects on us, it's life stealing the values for us. So we're pretty well set there, which is good. That's good. Now, the other way to, I would say, to like build around it, and this is the way I was messing around with it, is to use the Reaping Stone. The Reaping Stone, after an elemental status effect is removed, you become immune to all elemental status effects, and you gain another 5% lifesteal, which is cool. I like that. So what we end up doing, as we kind of quick apply these things, we're suddenly immune to the status effects. And we'll put on the Sparkfire again, because that's kind of where I'm at right now. And the Sparkfire works pretty well. And actually, something else to know with the Reaping Stone is by using the Ritualist, whenever we use our Relic, it's going to cleanse the negative status effects. So we can automatically cleanse it, and then we'll just be immediately immune to everything. And this is good because we're trying to use Miasma. So now, because we're immune to these pesky status effects, when we apply Overloaded, it's not going to hit us, because Overloaded is all bugged AF, and it's going to mess us up. So if you get the Reaping Stone active, then you can actually be using your Overloaded status effect and do a bunch of damage there. Now, the Reaping Stone also works really nicely with the Sparkfire, because if it's only lasting for about 3 seconds on us, it's going to end very quickly, triggering the Reaping Stone effect, which then means we can keep applying these status effects without actually getting any big meaty status effect durations on us or anything like that. And by using something like the Sparkfire and the Fetid Wounds on it, what you end up doing, you hit them both, right? Sparkfire, or the fire, is going to end after about 3 seconds, which means that we, have 10 seconds of the what's it called going on. Now, what sometimes happens, our corrosion lasts longer. And so what you can sometimes have happen is you get the 3 seconds end with a fire, triggers our Reaping Stone. And then, because it doesn't cleanse us, we still have corrosion going on. And then after the Reaping Stone ends, pretty soon after that, our corrosion ends. So then we get another trigger of our Reaping Stone active, if it lines up. I've just noticed that happening. It's not super consistent. It really just depends on how you've stacked things. So see how here the fire is going to end, and then we're going to have over 10 seconds of corrosion going on. So now when these 10 seconds of Reaping Stone end, then the corrosion is going to end. It's going to be like a 3-second gap difference, but then it'll automatically trigger it again, which is pretty nice. I like that. Oh, the other thing I forgot, I thought I put a note on there. Kinship does not seem to affect the values either. So whether or not they want it to be like that, I don't know. I could see them making the argument that it should affect the values, like you should take less damage when you have Kinship on, because Death Wish works like that. With Death Wish, if you have stacked Kinship as one of your traits, you're going to take less damage from the skill. So in a way, it makes sense if you have a maxed Kinship trait that the status effects you're applying to yourself would do less damage. However, at the same time, it could be some coding issues, like how are they supposed to make it understand those values are different, and I could just see it not working, and that's kind of okay to me, because our other values, like our resistances and stuff, are going to reduce how much damage we're taking from it. So in a way, it can be pretty easily mitigated, and it's really not too much damage overall, so it's pretty okay to manage. And some other notable rings that you could use to with this whole thing, the Black Spindle works nicely, because you're going to apply a status effect to an enemy and then start regenerating health. And because you've applied in a status effect to an enemy, you're now have a status effect on you, so you're taking damage. But because you're now regenerating health, it automatically sort of counteracts it. The thing to keep in mind, though, this only lasts for 3 seconds. So depending on the status effect that you're applying and how long it lasts, you need to make sure you're reapplying or re-upping them so that it lasts for like the full 15 seconds or the duration that you need it to be, right? Other choices, booster ring, just increasing all your resistances can help counteract whatever status effects that you're applying to yourself. The Ravager's Bargain, by using blood, you're, bleeding to yourself, you can quickly and easily use a Ravager's Bargain. Sort of the same thing with the Bloody Stone, Blood Tinged Ring. So it's pretty easy to just constantly, it's like having the Atonement fold on while also using the Blood Tinged Ring, right? I should note too, the Ring of Grace and the Ring of Retribution, the status effects don't count as enemy damage. So you're not actually getting any increased damage values or healing. It would be pretty cool, but they aren't technically enemy values. So, keep that in mind. The Wired Inhibitor, so if you apply slow to an enemy, it doesn't actually turn slow onto you. So you don't have to worry about that, which is nice. I think I've mentioned it before, like I talked about the base values and stuff. So if you have a whole bunch of increase with like elemental damage and stuff, it's not going to affect how much damage your status effects are doing to you. The only way that they are getting changed is to go down because of your resistances and the Black Blood or Dark Blood perk from the Ritualist. Ignoring Overloaded, of course, because it's screwy. Wow, this is already 22 minutes. I don't feel like it's been that long. Okay, I guess that's going to be this one. That's a random junk about this. I'll have the actual build gameplay here maybe right after this video. I just don't want it to be two separate. I just don't want it to be one giant video that's 45 minutes long. So thanks for checking it out. The Timekeeper's Forfeit is interesting. It's interesting. I don't know if it is actually in a good spot or not. Like, it's in an okay spot. It's okay. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it. But once you have other options, it feels like a hard sell. And then having the other rings, I don't know if it completely counteracts choosing this amulet over your other status effect ones. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think it's fine? Does it need something else? You be the judge. I'm not a developer. Take care.